Have you ever wondered what happens when a lost tank crew stumbles upon the most valuable target of the entire war? At 3:15 p.m. on April 12, 1945, Staff Sergeant Joe McCarthy was hopelessly lost in the Bavarian countryside in his M4 Sherman tank. He had been searching for his unit for 3 hours. Instead, he found something better. He found 40 fleeing Nazi generals and captured them all single-handedly. And with a single tank. How? Stay tuned, you'll be amazed. The war in Europe was almost over in April 1945. The German army was collapsing. American and British forces were pushing from the west, while Soviet forces were crushing them from the east. Hitler was in his Berlin bunker. The Third Reich was about 3 weeks away from surrendering. But no one had told the men on the ground that the war was almost over. They were still fighting. They were still dying. They were still trying not to be killed by desperate German soldiers. Staff Sergeant Joe McCarthy was a tank commander in the 3rd Armored Division of Patton's 3rd Army. McCarthy was 29 years old and from Brooklyn, New York. Before the war, he used to load cargo ships on the docks. He was a brawler. He had been in dozens of street fights. He knew how to react when things got out of hand. The Army appointed him a tank commander in 1943. They gave him an M4 Sherman medium tank and a crew of 4. The Sherman wasn't the best tank in the war. The German Panther and Tiger tanks were better armored, better armed, and more powerful. But the Sherman was reliable. It was easy to maintain. It was easy to repair. And America had built 50,000 of them. So if you lost one, there was always another ready. McCarthy's tank was named Lucky Strike, after a cigarette brand. The name was painted in white letters on the turret. So what would you name your own tank? The Lucky Strike had passed through France and Belgium and was now heading toward Germany. The tank had been hit. Its holes had been patched. It had been repaired a dozen times. But it kept working. It kept fighting. McCarthy's crew had been together for 8 months. They knew each other. They trusted each other. Because everyone knew their job, they could operate the tank without speaking. Private Danny Kowalski was the driver. He sat in the forward hull on the left side, looking through a small periscope and steering the tank with 2 sticks. Kowalski was a 20-year-old from Chicago. He was a quiet kid. He didn't say much, but he could steer a Sherman through mud, over obstacles, over anything. He was the best driver McCarthy had ever seen. Sergeant Eddie Santos was the gunner. He sat in the turret with McCarthy, manning the 75mm main gun. Santos was a 24-year-old Texan. Before the war, he had been a rodeo cowboy. He was calm under pressure. He could fire a tank round at a target from 800 yards while the tank was moving. He was a natural shooter. The loader and assistant driver were reserves. They were new guys. McCarthy didn't know them very well yet. They joined the crew 2 weeks after the previous loader was killed by a sniper. That was the situation in 1945. Experienced crews mixed in with the reserves. You learn quickly or you die. On April 12, 1945, the 3rd Armored Division was advancing into eastern Bavaria. The roads were filled with refugees, retreating German soldiers, and damaged vehicles. Chaos was rife. No one knew exactly where friendly troops were. No one knew where the Germans were. The front lines were fluid. They shifted hourly. So how did they find their positions? McCarthy's platoon of 5 Sherman tanks was ordered to hold an intersection 10 miles east of their current position. A simple task. Drive to the intersection. Make sure there are no Germans. Hold until the infantry arrives. Standard armored operation. They had been traveling for 2 hours when the lead tank hit a mine. The explosion tore off its left track. The tank was disabled, but the crew was okay. They got out. The platoon lieutenant called for rescue vehicles to retrieve the damaged tank. Meanwhile, the other 4 tanks continued toward the objective. That's when things started to go wrong. The road split in 2. The map said to go left, but a burned-out German truck was blocking the left road. The lieutenant decided to take the right road to find another way to the intersection. After 20 minutes, the lieutenant's tank lost track, a mechanical failure. The track came loose from the drive sprocket. The tank stopped suddenly. Now they had 3 tanks left. The lieutenant told McCarthy to continue toward the objective while he stayed by the wrecked tank and waited for repairs. McCarthy's tank, Lucky Strike, became the lead tank. McCarthy, following the map, guided the other two tanks down the road and tried to reach the intersection. But the map was wrong, or the roads had changed, or McCarthy had misread the map. It was likely one of the three. At 2:30 p.m., McCarthy realized he didn't know where he was. Nothing around him matched the map. He was in rugged farmland dotted with woodlands, small villages, narrow roads, and he had no idea which direction would take him to the American lines. It wasn't him. It was. Too much interference, too many units broadcasting on the same frequency. McCarthy could hear bits and pieces of the message, but he couldn't reach anyone who knew where he was or could give directions. At 2:45 p.m., McCarthy stopped 3 tanks. He pulled out a map. He tried to figure out where they were. 2 other tank commanders arrived. They studied the map together. Neither could figure it out. They were lost, completely lost, somewhere in Bavaria, maybe 10 miles from American lines, maybe 20. What do you think they did as a result? One of the tank commanders suggested they turn back, just go back the way they came until they found something recognizable. McCarthy agreed. He got back in his tank and started back. That's when they saw the Germans, 3 German soldiers, Wehrmacht. They were walking along the road. They saw the American tanks and immediately threw down their rifles and raised their hands in surrender. They looked terrified. McCarthy stopped the Lucky Strike. He went outside. He walked over to the Germans. None of them spoke English. McCarthy didn't speak German, but surrender is a universal language. Hands up means I give up. McCarthy used hand signals to ask for directions to the American lines. The Germans pointed west. McCarthy didn't believe them. The Germans would say anything to save their lives. It could be a trap. They could lead them into an ambush. Then, a French woman emerged from a nearby farmhouse. She spoke some English. She said she'd been forced to work on the farm for 2 years. She said the Germans were retreating. She said the American forces were about 10 miles west. If they turned for the next village, she said, the road they were on would take them there. McCarthy thanked her. He sat his 3 German prisoners down by the roadside. He returned to Lucky Strike. He told Kowalski to go to the next village. From there, they would turn around and head west toward the American lines. The 3 Shermans drove for 10 minutes. They reached the village. It was deserted. It was empty. No people, no Germans, only empty buildings. They found the turning point. A narrow road led west through the forest. It was perfect. McCarthy was leading the way. At 3:10 p.m., Lucky Strike entered the forest road. The road was narrow enough for a tank to pass. Trees lined both sides, a thick canopy overhead. Visibility was maybe 50 meters. Kowalski was driving slowly. They were watching for obstacles. They were watching for mines. They had been driving for 5 minutes when Kowalski said, "Sergeant, I see vehicles up ahead." McCarthy looked through his periscope. There were vehicles on the road, 3 or 4, maybe more. They couldn't see clearly through the trees. They could be American. They could be German. They could be abandoned civilian vehicles. "Stop!" McCarthy ordered. Lucky Strike stopped. The 2 tanks behind them also stopped. McCarthy stood up on the turret hatch. He picked up his binoculars. He looked at the vehicles in front of them. They were Mercedes personnel carriers. There were 4 of them. Black paint, sleek. And they were moving. They were heading toward the Shermans, about 200 meters away. McCarthy's first thought was that these were German officers fleeing the advancing Americans. The cars were too beautiful to be ordinary Wehrmacht cars. They were staff vehicles, officers, maybe colonels, maybe generals. So who owned these cars, which could be considered luxurious at the time? His second thought was that this might be a trap. German tanks might be hiding in the woods. Infantry might be in the trees. This could be bait to ambush the American tanks. Santos spoke from the artillery emplacement. "Sergeant, these are German staff cars. They're definitely officers." What are we going to do? McCarthy thought. If he opened fire and killed everyone in the cars, no one would question them. This was a battlefield. The German vehicles were legitimate targets. But if they were high-ranking officers, they might have valuable intelligence, maps, orders, information about German positions. They might be more valuable alive than dead. "Load the helicopters," McCarthy ordered. "Santos, fire a shot in front of the lead vehicle. Not at it, in front of it. Warning shot. Let's see if they stop." Santos loaded a high-explosive round into his 75mm cannon. He aimed at a point about 20 meters in front of the lead Mercedes. He fired. The round hit the road with a loud bang. Dirt and debris scattered everywhere. The lead Mercedes slammed on its brakes. It stopped. The other three vehicles stopped behind it. For a moment, nothing happened. The German vehicles just stopped. Then the doors opened. Uniformed men got out. They stood beside their vehicles. They were looking at the American tanks. They weren't running. They weren't fighting. They were just standing there. Do you think they were paralyzed by fear? McCarthy could see them through his binoculars. They were wearing German uniforms, but they weren't ordinary Wehrmacht gray uniforms. They were black with silver insignia, SS uniforms, and the men wearing them had enough medals and decorations to fill a military museum. These weren't colonels. These were generals, high-ranking SS generals, and they were surrendering. McCarthy couldn't believe what he was seeing. He counted at least 20 men standing by the cars. All of them were officers. All of them were high-ranking. Some looked old, in their 50s or 60s. Staff officers, not combat soldiers. One of the Germans stepped forward. He walked toward Lucky Strike, his hands raised. He wore the uniform of an SS general, more decorated than McCarthy had ever seen before. The man stopped about 15 meters from the tank. He called out in English with a thick German accent. "We surrender! Don't fire! We're unarmed!" McCarthy still didn't believe it. It could be a ruse. He might be stalling while the German tanks moved into position. He opened the turret and scanned the forest from both sides. He saw nothing. There was no movement, no hidden troops, just trees and 4 cars full of surrendering Germans. The German general called out again. "We have no weapons! We surrender to American forces! Please don't fire!" McCarthy made a decision. He grabbed the .30 caliber machine gun on the turret. He pointed it at the Germans. He responded in English. "Everyone out of the cars! Hands on your heads! Don't approach the vehicles! If anyone reaches for a weapon, I'll kill them!" The Germans obeyed immediately. The doors of all 4 Mercedes opened. The men got out, all in uniform, all with their hands on their heads. They moved away from the cars and stood in a line on the road. McCarthy counted them through his binoculars. 42 men, all officers, all SS, and every one of them seemed terrified of the American tank pointing at them. McCarthy radioed the other 2 tank commanders to cover their flanks. "Watch the forest. Make sure this isn't an ambush." Then he emerged from the Lucky Strike with his Thompson submachine gun. Kowalski followed him, an M1 carbine in hand. Santos remained in the machine gun turret. McCarthy walked toward the row of German officers. He held his Thompson at the ready. He watched their hands. He watched their eyes. He was looking for anyone who might try something foolish. But these men weren't combatants. They were staff officers. They were office officers. They were staff personnel. They looked as if they'd never fired a weapon in combat. The senior general stepped forward. He was around 60 years old. He had gray hair. He was thin. He wore the uniform of an SS Obergruppenführer. It was the equivalent of a lieutenant general's uniform. It had 3 stars. He was a very high rank. His nameplate read, Bittrich. Bittrich spoke English with a German accent. "I am SS Obergruppenführer Wilhelm Bittrich. We are senior officers of the Waffen-SS, withdrawing from the Eastern Front. We have no combat units. We have no weapons. We want to surrender to American forces. We would rather be in American captivity than Soviet captivity." McCarthy understood immediately. These SS generals knew the Soviets were coming from the East. They knew what would happen if the Red Army caught them. The Soviets hated the SS. They had every reason to hate them. SS units had committed atrocities on the Eastern Front. They had massacred civilians, burned villages. If the Soviets had captured these generals, they would have been executed, probably after being tortured. So they were running west. They were trying to reach American lines. They were trying to surrender to the Americans instead of the Soviets. And they had encountered McCarthy's missing tank patrol by pure chance. McCarthy looked at Bittrick. Then he looked at the 41 officers standing in a line, hands on their heads. This was madness. He had captured 42 enemy generals with 3 tanks, by accident, because he had gotten lost and taken a wrong turn. "Are you all surrendering?" McCarthy asked. "Yes," Bittrick said. "All of us. We're not interested in fighting anymore. The war is over. Germany has lost. We just want to survive." McCarthy didn't trust the SS generals. He didn't trust anything they said. But he also couldn't have shot 42 unarmed men. That would have been a war crime. Besides, these men might have valuable intelligence, information about German positions, plans, orders. This could be an intelligence goldmine. "Everyone stay in line," McCarthy said. "Hands above your head. If anyone moves incorrectly, my sniper will kill everyone. Understood?" "We understand," Bittrick said. "We will cooperate fully." McCarthy told Kowalski to search the Mercedes. "Search for weapons, search for documents, search for anything important." Kowalski went from car to car, checking the interior. He found briefcases. He found papers. He found maps. There were no weapons. The Germans were telling the truth. They were unarmed. McCarthy turned on his radio. He called the other 2 tank commanders. "There are 42 SS generals here. They're all surrendering. We need to get them back to American lines. I need a tank to lead, a tank to follow. Keep them between us. If they try anything, we'll kill them all." The other tank commanders agreed. They couldn't believe it either. 42 generals by the 3 missing tanks. He was taken prisoner. This would be the craziest story of the entire war. Watch until the end for the rest of the story and share your thoughts in the comments. McCarthy told Bittrick to get his men back to the Mercedes. They would drive west in tanks. Americans in front, Americans behind, Germans in the middle. If anyone tried to escape, the tanks would destroy the cars. Bittrick nodded. He gave the order in German. The officers returned to the Mercedes. The hands were still visible. There was no sudden movement. They were very careful. They were very cooperative. They wanted to get out of this. The convoy started moving at 3:45 p.m. 1 Sherman in front, 4 Mercedes in the middle, 2 Shermans in the back. They were going slowly, maybe 10 miles an hour. The forest road was narrow. The tanks barely fit. The Mercedes followed cautiously. McCarthy stood in his turret, watching the German cars. The Santos had its main gun trained on them. If anything went wrong, a single tank shell would destroy a Mercedes and kill everyone inside. The Germans knew this. They drove smoothly. There were no problems. There were no attempts to escape. They drove for 20 minutes. The forest road led to a wider road. McCarthy recognized it from his map. This was the main highway heading west. American territory was perhaps 10 miles ahead. They had made it. At 4:10 p.m., they encountered an American roadblock. Police were manning a checkpoint. The police spotted 3 Sherman tanks escorting 4 German personnel carriers and immediately got on the radio. Within minutes, a captain appeared. He looked at the Mercedes. He looked at McCarthy. "Sergeant, what's this?" "Sir, there are 42 SS generals in those vehicles. They've all surrendered. They're all cooperating. I think they're important." The captain walked over to the Mercedes and looked inside. He saw the uniforms. He saw the insignia. He saw the ranks. His eyes widened. "Oh my God, you caught 42 generals?" "Yes, sir. They were trying to reach our lines to surrender. They didn't want the Soviets to catch them." The captain immediately got on the radio. He called division headquarters. He explained what had happened. McCarthy could hear the response coming from the radio. The division wanted these prisoners brought to headquarters immediately. They wanted the intelligence officers to interview them. This was very important. It was very important indeed. The convoy continued on to division headquarters, accompanied by a military police escort. They arrived at 5 Onkonkaham. By then, word had spread. Dozens of officers were waiting, intelligence officers, staff officers, even a colonel. Everyone wanted to see the captured SS generals. The Germans were pulled out of the Mercedes and lined up. The intelligence officers began taking their photographs. They were checking their aids. They were taking their names in ranks. It was complete chaos. Organized chaos, but chaos. McCarthy stood next to Lucky Strike, watching all this. Kowalski and Santos were sitting on the tank, smoking. 2 other tank crews were nearby. Everyone was tired. They had been lost for hours. Then they had captured 42 generals. Then they had driven them 10 miles through obscurity and back to American lines. It had been a long day. A lieutenant colonel walked up to McCarthy. He looked at him. "Sergeant, I'm with G2 Intelligence. Do you understand what you just seized?" "Some German generals, sir." "These aren't just any generals. This is SS Obergruppenführer Wilhelm Bittrich. He commanded the K2 SS Panzer Corps. He was in Arnhem. He was in the Ardennes. He's one of the most senior SS commanders still alive. And he has 41 other senior SS officers with him. Maps, orders, intelligence briefings. This is the biggest intelligence seizure of the month, maybe the biggest of the year." McCarthy didn't know who Bittrich was. He hadn't known they were such valuable targets. He'd spotted the German officers and captured them because that's what was supposed to happen when enemy officers surrendered. "Sir, I just got lucky. I took a wrong turn and ran into them." The lieutenant colonel smiled. "Sometimes that's how war works. Right place, right time. You did well, Sergeant. Really well." For the next 3 hours, the intelligence officers interrogated the captured SS generals. They had everything: maps of German defensive positions, orders detailing troop movements, communication codes, lists and locations of remaining SS units. A complete intelligence breakdown of German forces in southern Germany. More importantly, the generals were talking. They had stopped fighting. They wanted to cooperate. They wanted to prove they were valuable prisoners so the Americans wouldn't hand them over to the Soviets. They had given up everything: the locations of supply depots, the locations of command centers, the names of other senior officers still trying to escape. By 7:00 p.m., American forces were raiding German positions using intelligence obtained from captured generals. At 9:00 p.m., 3 more SS officers were captured based on information provided by Bittrich. The intelligence was of extraordinary value. It was the first time such a thing had happened, and it had never been seen before. So the date on which 42 German SS officers had been captured was a matter of serious debate. General Patton heard of the capture. He demanded to speak with the tank sergeant who had accomplished it. McCarthy was brought to Patton's headquarters at 10:00 p.m. He was still wearing his dirty tanker overalls. He still smelled of tank exhaust and gun oil. Patton looked at McCarthy. "Sergeant, I heard you captured 42 SS generals today." Yes, sir. We were lucky, sir." "Luckily, nothing happened. You had the presence of mind to realize what you had found and bring them in alive. Many men would have shot them. You made the right decision. This intelligence is saving lives right now. Good work." "Thank you, sir." Patton recommended McCarthy for the Bronze Star. The paperwork was completed in 3 days. McCarthy received the medal on April 16th. The commendation cited his actions in capturing enemy general officers and providing valuable intelligence that contributed to the success of Third Army operations. But McCarthy never told the full story. He never said he found those generals simply because they were lost. He took a wrong turn and accidentally stumbled upon them. He made everyone think it was a planned operation. He made them think he was sent to intercept the convoy. This made the story even better. Do you think he told the truth? The truth was simpler. McCarthy was lost. He took a wrong turn on a forest road. He had accidentally stumbled upon the most valuable target any tank crew had found in 1945, and he had the good sense to capture them rather than kill them. The captured SS generals spent the rest of the war in American custody. Bittrich and several others were later tried for war crimes. Some were convicted, some acquitted. Bittrich served 3 years in prison and was released in 1948, living the rest of his free life until 1979. McCarthy never saw any of them again after that day. He returned to his tank. He continued fighting in Germany until Victory Day on May 8th. Lucky Strike survived the entire war without losing a single crew member. McCarthy always said the tank's name was accurate. They were lucky. After the war, McCarthy returned to his home in Brooklyn. He went back to work on the docks. He married, he had 3 children, he lived a normal life. When people asked about the war, he would say he was a tank commander. He fought in Europe. He did nothing special. He never mentioned the 42 generals. The full story of McCarthy's actions that day wasn't made public until 1998. Then, a military historian researching Third Army operations in April 1945 found references to the capture of 42 S officers by a single tank crew. The historian began to dig deeper. McCarthy's name is on the Bronze Star. Intelligence reports mentioning his capture were found. Photographs of surrendering generals were found. The historian tracked down McCarthy's family. McCarthy died in 1989 at the age of 73. However, his son still lived in Brooklyn. The historian interviewed him and asked about his father's war service. His son said he didn't talk much about it. He said he was a tanker. He fought in France and Germany. There was nothing dramatic, nothing special. But his son had his father's personal papers, letters, photographs, a diary McCarthy kept occasionally during the war. The historian asked to see them, and his son agreed. McCarthy's diary contained an entry dated April 12, 1945. It was brief. McCarthy's handwriting was rough. It read, "I got lost today. I took a wrong turn. I found German staff cars, 42 officers, all generals, SS. They surrendered. I brought them back." The intelligence officers were very excited. The colonel said it was important. I don't know why. I just did my job. That was it. No drama, no excitement, just a matter-of-fact routine account of capturing 42 enemy generals. The historian couldn't believe it. It was one of the most important intelligence seizures on the European front, and McCarthy wrote 4 sentences about it. The historian delved deeper into German records. He discovered that the convoy McCarthy had captured carried not only generals, but also critical documents, the complete battle formations for the remaining SS divisions in southern Germany, communication codes still in use, maps showing supply routes and ammunition depots, the personnel files of every S officer above the rank of colonel alive in April 1945. When American intelligence officers received these documents, they immediately forwarded them to their operational commands. The Third Army used the information to plan raids on SS supply depots, seizing thousands of tons of ammunition and fuel. The Ninth Army used the communication codes to intercept German radio traffic. It was used. It determined which units planned to continue fighting and which were ready to surrender. Intelligence believed that McCarthy's capture shortened the war in southern Germany by at least a week, perhaps 2. Every day the war ended sooner saved lives. It saved the lives of Americans, German civilians, and concentration camp prisoners. The quicker the war ended, the more people survived. Historians estimate that the intelligence McCarthy intercepted likely saved between 500 and 1,000 American lives. It prevented casualties by allowing American forces to evade defended positions and target weak points in the German lines. It's impossible to know exactly how many lives were saved, but the number was significant, and McCarthy, lost and misguided, was drawn into it. The historian published an article about the incident in 1999. The title of the article was "Accidental Victory: How a Lost Tank Crew Captured the SS High Command." It was published in a military history journal. Not many people read it. It was too academic, it was too technical, but it documented what happened. It recorded the story in the annals of history. In 2003, the History Channel produced a documentary about the extraordinary captures of prisoners during World War II. It included McCarthy's story. It interviewed the historian. It showed photos of the captured generals. It showed McCarthy's Bronze Star. The documentary aired once, garnering good ratings, then disappeared into the archives. But some veterans did see it, men who had served in the 3rd Armored Division, men who had been there in April 1945. Some remembered hearing about a tank crew capturing a group of German generals. They thought it was just a rumor, a war story that had been exaggerated in its telling. Now they knew it was true. One of these veterans was Robert Fitzgerald, a tank commander in the same division as McCarthy. Fitzgerald was 85 years old in 2003 when he saw the documentary. He knew McCarthy a little. They had been at some of the same briefings. They had spoken several times. Fitzgerald remembered McCarthy as a quiet man, talented, someone who did his job without complaint. Fitzgerald wrote a letter to the History Channel. He said he knew McCarthy. He said McCarthy never boasted about capturing generals, never talked about it. He just got back in his tank and kept fighting. Fitzgerald said this was typical of men of that generation. They did extraordinary things and then never talked about them. They just went home and lived normal lives. The History Channel forwarded Fitzgerald's letter to the historian investigating the story, who added it to his files. It confirmed what he had suspected. McCarthy hadn't considered his actions extraordinary. It was just something that happened. It was part of the war. But it was extraordinary. The capture of 42 SS generals by a single tank crew was unprecedented. It had never been seen anywhere else in the war. Individual soldiers occasionally captured high-ranking officers. Airborne units behind enemy lines would sometimes capture German staff officers who had entered their positions. What about 42 generals? All at once? Did they surrender to 3 tanks? This was unique. The intelligence value was also extraordinary. Most of the captured documents were tactical, unit positions, emergency orders. They were only good for a day or two. But the documents in the Mercedes staff cars were strategic. They revealed the entire SS command structure in southern Germany. Every unit, every officer, every supply point. This information was valuable for weeks. American intelligence officers who worked with the captured documents later said it was like obtaining the enemy's entire tactical plan. Everything the SS had planned. Everything else. Where their last reserves were positioned. Which units would fight to the bitter end and which were ready to collapse. It was a complete intelligence picture. And it all stemmed from McCarthy's wrong turn on a forest road. The story raises an interesting question about luck and skill in warfare. Was McCarthy lucky or skilled? He was lost. This was undeniably a mistake. But when he encountered the German convoy, he made the right decision. Instead of killing everyone, he fired a warning shot. He realized the prisoners could be valuable. He brought them back alive and passed the information on to intelligence officers who could use it. A less experienced tank commander might have opened fire. He destroyed the Mercedes, killing everyone inside. The enemy officers were reportedly neutralized. No one would have questioned it. But McCarthy had 8 months of combat experience. He had learned to think before firing. He had learned that sometimes capturing is better than killing. This wasn't luck. This was judgment. This was experience. This was a skill developed over months of combat. So perhaps McCarthy was both lucky and talented. Because he encountered the convoy, he was lucky. When he found them, he was skilled enough to handle the situation effectively. The captured SS generals never spoke publicly about their surrender. Most served time in prison after the war. Some were executed for war crimes. The survivors were released in the late 1940s and early 1950s. They returned to Germany, living quiet lives. They tried to forget the war. Veteran General Bittrick was interviewed by a German historian in the 1970s. The historian asked about his surrender. Bittrick said that in early April 1945, he decided the war was lost. He said he wanted to survive. He told the Americans that surrendering was the only option. He said he planned to reach American lines when his convoy encountered American tanks. The historian asked Bittrick if he remembered the American sergeant who had captured him. Bittrick said, no. He never learned the man's name. He only remembered that he was young, perhaps 30. He spoke with an American accent. He was from Brooklyn or New York. He was a professional. He didn't shoot prisoners. He treated them right, according to the Geneva Convention. He was McCarthy. He was a professional. He was right. He did his job. Nothing dramatic. He was just a sergeant doing what sergeants do, making decisions, dealing with situations, bringing his crew home safe and sound. McCarthy's tank, Lucky Strike, had survived the war intact. After Victory Day, it was taken to a collection point for American equipment. The tank was examined. Despite 8 months of combat, it was found to be in good condition. It was loaded onto a ship and sent back to the United States. It was likely scrapped in 1946 when the Army was destroying thousands of surplus tanks. The name Lucky Strike was apt. The tank was lucky. It had fought in France, Belgium, and Germany without losing a single crew member. It had survived situations that would have destroyed other tanks. They had been in the right place at the right time and captured 42 enemy generals. They were lucky. McCarthy's crew stayed together until Victory Day. Then they split up. Kowalski went home to Chicago, Santos to his home in Texas. The loader and the assistant driver went their separate ways. McCarthy went home to Brooklyn. They promised to stay in touch. They wrote letters for a few years. Then life got busy. Jobs, families. The letters stopped. In 1985, 40 years after the war, Santos tracked McCarthy down. He called him. They talked for 2 hours. They reminisced about the war. They reminisced about the crew. They reminisced about Lucky Strike. Santos asked McCarthy if he remembered capturing those German generals. McCarthy laughed. He said of course he did. He said it was the craziest thing that had ever happened to him in the entire war. He said he still couldn't believe they had accidentally encountered 42 generals. Santos asked why McCarthy never told the story. He never told the story. McCarthy said it didn't seem important. He said they were just doing their jobs. He said everyone in the war had a story. His wasn't special. Santos disagreed. He said capturing 42 generals was pretty special. McCarthy just laughed. Maybe, he said, but it was a long time ago. That was their last conversation. Santos died in 1987, a heart attack. McCarthy went to the funeral. He saw other veterans there. They talked about the war, about Lucky Strike, about the crew. One mentioned the captured generals. McCarthy just nodded. Yes, it happened, he said. He didn't elaborate. He just accepted it and moved on. McCarthy died 2 years later. His funeral was small. His family, a few friends, a few people from the dock where he worked. No military honors were given because no one realized he was a decorated veteran. His Bronze Star was in a drawer at home. His son found it after the funeral. He didn't know what it was for. Read the quote. He realized his father had done something important in the war. If only he'd asked. That's the tragedy of that generation. They did extraordinary things and then never talked about them. Their children and grandchildren never knew. The stories died with them. McCarthy's story almost died too. If that historian hadn't tracked down references in old intelligence reports and delved into the details, he would have been long dead. It's now documented. It's now part of the historical record. Now people know that on April 12, 1945, a lost tank crew stumbled upon the most valuable intelligence capture of the final weeks of World War II. And they know it happened because a Brooklyn dock worker turned tank sergeant made the right decisions at the right time and brought 42 enemy generals back alive instead of killing them. If you found this story interesting, please like this video. These forgotten histories matter. These people deserve to be remembered. Subscribe to this channel for more untold stories from World War II. Real people who achieved extraordinary things without seeking recognition. Leave a comment below. Let us know where you watched it. Story if you know of any other forgotten heroes whose stories deserve to be told, let us know. We read every comment. This community keeps these stories alive. Thanks for watching. And thanks for remembering the people who accidentally changed history.